Wendell Vaughn passed away at 1:35 on 6th November. Wendell Vaughn was born 1st of June 1925 in Medford, Jackson County, the parents of the parents of Roy and Tressie Vaughn. For the last 6 months, I've been researching the family genealogies. I've discovered our family is the history of America. My mother's side came to America on the second pilgrim ship, the Anne, in 1623. It was Ralph and Joyce Wallen. My father's side came 4 years earlier, in 1916, on the Bonanova, John William Vaughn. He was born an illegitimate son of a low-level government bureaucrat in Dolgelly, Wales. With no prospects, he signed on as an indentured servant to the Virginia Company. Of the 120 on the Bonanova who came to Jamestown, a year later, there was only 28 people still alive. He was fortunately one of those 28 people. Think about that for a moment. Starvation, disease, Indian War, and only 20% survived the first year. The four families of my grandparents settled Oregon in the 1800s. My mother's side came in 1847, my father's side in the 1840s. A great uncle captained one of the first wagon trains to Oregon. William Hatchett Vaughn, Uncle Billy, whose house in Molalla is on the National Registry of Historic Homes. Wendell grew up on his parents' ranch on Lower Horse Road, just on the south side of what is now the road, or what was the Rogue River, but is now the Lost Creek Dam and Lake. All the people who would become his extended family had lakes, had ranches along the Rogue and Elk Creek rivers. They're all gone now. The people, and sadly the ranches too. At age 14, Wendell became a ranch hand at the Ginger Rogers Rogue River Ranch. Each morning with the boys milking 100 cows, and then in the afternoon after school coming back and milking the cows again in the afternoon. My parents often told us of the Depression-era stories, the years between the First and Second War. How they both wore homemade jeans, insulated their shoes and their coats with newspapers. They remember the first store-bought bread they had, and how during World War II everything was rationed. I found an old newspaper clipping among the boxes of pictures of the weekly ration schedules. Wendell married Margie McGrew on 27th June 1946. In the 70s, my father's parents, Roy and Jessie Vaughn, were interviewed by the Jackson County Historical Society. My dad's parents were simple people, and Dad recalls when the power company wanted to electrify the rural communities of Jackson County. They offered people free electric stoves to try to entice them to sign up for electricity. My grandparents accepted because they wanted electric light. They continued to use the wood stove, only using the electric stove as a cabinet. For the interview, my granddad and grandma talked about the ranch and the odd jobs that Granddad had running cattle, road building, carpentry, and the various state and county projects. There is a distinct sense of pride and excitement in Dad's words that come through, even in the written word. But from the interviewer, not so much. She comes across as bored to tears. After about 20 pages, she cuts off the interview. And initially, after reading the interview, I had kind of the same measure of the same impression. But when at my grandfather's funeral, the funeral was mobbed with people. The mortuary only relayed that it is very uncommon for older people to have more than a few people attend. A few dozen is rare, but my granddad's funeral, there were nearly 200 people. A simple man, but a simple life lived well. He didn't write a book, he didn't invent anything or design a building. He left the mark of a common man. He was the one you went to when you needed help. And the stories told at his funeral, too, of the help he and grandmother gave went on, and everyone had a story, and everyone wanted to be heard. And there on the dais was a tiny, plain pine board coffin. Do you remember that? Yeah. Like father, like son. Wendell was very much like his father. A simple life lived well. Virtually everyone whose steps intersected with his in life loved him. He did not write a book. In fact, I cannot remember him ever picking up a book except to move it. He disliked, you know, don't you? He disliked movies and couldn't stay awake from movies. He didn't invent anything, and he wasn't a particularly curious person. I'm a software engineer, and on occasion he would dare to ask me what it was I was working on, only to stop me because he didn't understand what I was talking about. During the last precious hours before he died, he told me that he thought I was interesting. And let me tell you, that made my eyes widen. Life with Wendell as a father was a struggle at times. He was a simple man. I liked to read books. I remember spending my first dollar I ever earned on a book. I liked to take things apart, like the family lawnmower, which caused alarm with Dad, but after a while he learned that I would put things back together. He barely knew how to use a wrench. Some of this is, I didn't. So there was no pretense in Dad. When I would work on projects, Dad would stand by patiently watching and waiting to offer a helping hand. And in that way, he was like a puppy watching something he didn't know anything about, but was content to be in the presence of someone who did. One of his travel friends related this story. During one of the frequent stops, a gaggle of pastel-clad caravanners were offering unsolicited advice on a maintenance problem of a fellow caravaner. Wendell parked nearby, offered to provide the tools. And when he presented his tools chest, it was obviously a new tool chest for which the committee offered expressions of admiration. Wendell responded, "They're not new." He had had them for over 10 years, to which the admiration was replaced with laughter at the realization that Wendell's tool set was virtually new because he had never used them. He had no idea how to use the tools. You're nodding, aren't you? When faced with inevitable teenage issues, Dad was useless. His solution to me was to get my hair cut and to stop fighting with my brother and sister. I don't think Dad liked kids. He did not like the noise. My cousin recently related to me that that was her memory of him. But she also offered this insight. She offered that he probably had PTSD from his service years. The men of World War II just did not talk, and they kept it all in. They never spoke of the war. I know, I badgered Dad about the war constantly. Over the years, I was able to use more and more small utterances. Never more than a few utterances, but they add up eventually. It isn't fair to define a person by an event that is but a few hours of a life. Some people toil all of their lives without accomplishment or recognition, but sometimes those events are so significant and the potential personal sacrifice is, as President Lincoln described in the Gettysburg Address, as the full measure. Dad was called up for the draft once, but was rejected for colorblindness. He was called up a second time in October '43, and he was allowed to select the Navy. And again, due to colorblindness, he was only allowed into the Seabees, the Naval Construction Forces. After initial training, he and several of his buddies volunteered for the new Naval Combat Demolition Unit, which later became the Navy SEALs, which I am actually quite certain that they had no idea what they were getting into. Dad never talked much about the training in Florida at what is now the location of the National Navy UDT SEAL Museum. His only comment on his training was that they took them out 2 miles in the ocean and made us swim back for breakfast. And after training, they were flown to England for preparation for D-Day. As a member of the Navy Combat Demolition Unit, they were the first on Omaha Beach, literally the first on Omaha Beach. They went in before the Army, before the other landing craft, because they were tasked with blowing up the obstacles the Germans had put in place to foul the landing craft. The NDCU units suffered 41% casualties, almost half were died or wounded. And most significantly, actually, I saw a document I found in Dad's stuff yesterday that listed the dead and wounded. There were more dead than wounded, which is very uncommon. Usually the percentages are the other way. There's more wounded than dead. The sacrifice for which the unit received one of the presidential citations awarded during D-Day. Dad received another medal for his personal actions, the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. After D-Day, his unit was returned to Florida and he began training in preparation for the invasion of Japan. The horrors of D-Day kept Dad from talking at length about that day and kept him from attending the 40th anniversary hosted by Ronald Reagan in 1984. Wendell's grandson, Elliot, and I visited Omaha Beach in Normandy, France in 2010. A close friend gathered a jar of sand from the Normandy Omaha Beach as a gift from my father. That jar of sand was never more than an arm's length away from him, ever, after he received it as a gift. A portion of that sand was placed in his pocket and will remain with him now forever. About 1999, I was attending a conference, and I noticed that the man sitting next to me was speaking with a heavy French accent. I inquired as to where he was from, and he said, Normandy, France. And I replied, and I told him about my father. And instantly, he remarked to me, thank you very much. And I looked at him and I said, what? He says, tell your father thank you very much. He says, we are taught from a very early age that if we ever encounter a D-Day veteran, to thank them. So when I next saw my father, I related the story and the thank you. And he turned away and began to weep. I will never know how much of the man who was my father was damaged in all the invisible ways a human can be damaged. We can never know how much his distance from us was caused by the war. I now suspect most of it. The distance from loved ones is a common phenomenon among people who are loved publicly. And I suspect they find comfort among those they love to be able to shut down, to withdraw, and to find peace and silence with those they love. And so the personal traits that elicit the respect and admiration of acquaintances don't translate to family. There are people who have more than a few friends, like Will Rogers. Dad never met a man he didn't like. Everyone who knew Wendell were more than friends. They loved him. He was not wealthy. But he never said no to true need. If you disappointed him, forgiveness is quick. Dad was a father who was exceptional in a crisis, but absolutely worthless for the mundane. As his child or grandchild, you pretty much were a non-entity in his life. And my mother's parents were wonderful grandparents and doted on their grandkids. But I suspect it's because they never went to war. I was a challenge to my parents. I challenged my parents. I can say quite literally, my father, I don't want to say that. Just a second here, a little real-time editing. So when I was 17, I wanted my parents' attention very badly. I began to act out in bad ways. But fortunately, it soon occurred to me that my anguish was all of my own making. I was expecting my parents to be something that they were not, and they were not ever going to be. I was the problem, not them. And this is how I survived till now. Since Dad's impending death, I have been an emotional wreck. Why am I a wreck after so many years of being emotionally aloof? A good friend observed why. I stopped judging them. As the Dylan song says, everything up to that point had been left unresolved. Everything had been left unresolved. And it was not till the final days that Wendell became introspective, regretting that he never said to us kids that he loved us very often. He said it had been a topic of conversation among his friends here. It was not just him, but it was common of his generation. And he told me that he loved me, and he gave me a warm hug. And I could then feel the feebleness of his waning health as he apologized. As I was taught by his example, my forgiveness was quick. We were both moved to tears in the subsequent moments of silence. In the final hours before he died, I asked my family to give me 15 minutes alone with Dad. At that point, Dad could barely utter a few recognizable syllables. And I spoke a few simple words, and I kept it simple. I said, I love you, Dad. I apologized to him for the disappointments, but I have already forgiven him his. Because from his example, I know he has always forgiven mine, but I needed to hear myself say the words. I kept it simple. Mostly we just looked into each other's eyes, and that was enough. As enough as one can be in the final hours of a man's life marked by heroism, hard work, hundreds, perhaps thousands of devoted friends, and oceans of simple, honest, unjudgmental love. The Dylan song goes on to say, try imagining a place where it's always safe and warm. I don't have to imagine. Wherever Dad was that warm and safe place, and for me, frequently. I marvel at the mythical ability to love and be loved so effortlessly. A simple and kind man who is missed by virtually everyone whose steps intersected his in life. For all the love they did not overtly show with utterances, hugs, and presence in our life, all knew that like with his father and mother, he was my shelter from the storm. Goodbye, Dad. I'll see you soon. Not too soon. The pioneer's genes that you and Mom passed on is going to take a while. See you in 30 years or so. Goodbye, Dad. One more thing, and I want to talk to the people in this room and say, in the genealogy work I've been doing in the family, I found over 6 large boxes in Dad's room of pictures, photos from the family. And sadly, most of the photos are not signed. We don't know who the people are, and we don't have dates or places. So please, please, please go through your pictures, write the names of who they are on the back of those pictures, and if you can, dates and places. Leave that legacy for your children, because if you don't, it ends with you. Don't do that to your children. Thank you very much.